The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not an email, not a phone call. A letter. The kind with a wax seal pressed into the back flap like someone wanted me to know this was serious before I even opened it. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, still in my reading glasses, still in the clothes I'd slept in. 63 years old, and I'd stopped pretending mornings required performance. I recognized the law firm's name on the return address. Harwick & Sohn. My brother had mentioned them once years ago, when he was settling our mother's affairs. I set the cup down carefully and opened the envelope. My younger brother had died 6 weeks earlier. A stroke, fast, no warning. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. Not a fight exactly, more like a silence that grew furniture and settled in. I'd sent flowers to the funeral because his daughter called me, and I wasn't the kind of man who made a grief worse by being absent. I stood in the back. I didn't stay for the reception. The letter informed me that I had been named in his estate. I read it twice. Then I set it on the table next to my coffee and looked at the window for a long time. My son-in-law called that afternoon. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 days, which was normal. He was polite the way people are polite when they want something confirmed. He asked if I'd received anything from a law firm. I said yes. He said good, then paused just a half beat too long. He said he wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. I said he wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. I said I'd read it over. He said they were happy to help. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat with that for a while. My daughter and her husband had moved 40 minutes away 2 years ago. Good house, good neighborhood. They'd borrowed money from me to make the down payment. Not a loan with paperwork, just a father helping his child. The kind of thing you don't put in writing because you believe in the people involved. I believed in her. Him, I was less certain about. The estate appointment was set for a Thursday, 11 in the morning. I didn't tell anyone the time or the location. I told my daughter I had a meeting downtown and left it at that. The night before, my son-in-law called again. His voice was casual in the way voices are casual when someone has practiced being casual. He said he'd spoken to someone who knew about estate law. He said in situations like this, surviving family members are sometimes entitled to act as co-administrators. He used the word entitled twice. I wrote that down on a notepad I keep by the phone. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted to see the shape of what was happening in plain ink. I said I'd look into it. He said he could come with me for support. I said I appreciated that and told him I'd already arranged a ride. I hadn't. But I made a call that night I'd been putting off for 2 years. An attorney I knew through a man I used to work with, someone who handled estates and wasn't interested in drama, only in precision. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what I had. She told me to bring everything and to come alone. I slept reasonably well. At my age, you learn that worry is expensive, and the night before, a hard thing doesn't benefit from being extended. In the morning, I dressed plainly, packed the letter and my notes into a manila folder, and drove to her office. She read everything at her desk without speaking. When she finished, she looked up and said, "What do you know about the estate's value?" I told her what the letter had suggested. She nodded slowly. She asked about my daughter and her husband. I told her the shape of things, the borrowed money, the calls, the word entitled. She made a note and said, "You were right to call." We drove to the probate office together. She didn't offer reassurance. She offered process, which I trusted more. The building was the kind of government building that doesn't try to impress anyone. Fluorescent lights, a directory board with plastic letters, a smell like paper and old carpet. The clerk was efficient and indifferent in equal measure. We were shown to a conference room with a rectangular table and chairs that suggested function over comfort. My son-in-law arrived 8 minutes after us. He was alone, which surprised me, and composed in the way that suggested preparation. He wore a jacket I hadn't seen before. He nodded at me and looked at my attorney the way people look at something they didn't expect to find on the table. My daughter was not with him. I asked where she was. He said she was at home, that she'd wanted to be here but wasn't feeling well, that he was here to represent the family's interests. The phrase "the family's interests" landed with a weight he probably didn't notice himself giving it. The estate representative entered and began without ceremony. He explained what the meeting was and what it wasn't. He explained what the letter had outlined, that my brother had left specific instructions, that several properties and accounts were involved, and that there were conditions. My son-in-law shifted in his chair. He asked about administration. He asked about co-signatories. He used the word oversight. The representative explained that the estate had designated an executor, and that the executor had specific obligations and specific protections. He said my name as the secondary party of record. He said it fully and evenly, the way official documents say names, without feeling, without interpretation. My son-in-law said that was unusual. The representative said it was not. There was a clause. My attorney had not seen it before the meeting, but she didn't react when it was read. She made a note, small and deliberate. The clause stated that in the event of any attempt to accelerate, redirect, or contest the estate's distribution through external pressure or undisclosed third-party arrangement, the estate would enter a supervised hold. It was the kind of language that doesn't make sense until it does. My son-in-law asked for clarification. The representative gave it to him plainly and without embellishment. The room went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary silence. My son-in-law looked at his hands. He looked at me, then he looked at the table. I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:24. I fixed the time the way I'd been fixing times all week, pressing each moment flat like a pressed flower, keeping it for later. The meeting ended with paperwork and next steps. No one shook hands. My son-in-law walked out ahead of us, pulling out his phone before he reached the door. Outside, the sun was bright and indifferent. My attorney fell into step beside me. She said, "He made 3 procedural errors in there." I said, "I noticed 2. She said the third was subtler. He referenced a document that hadn't been mentioned publicly yet. She said that would be useful." My phone rang before we reached the car. My daughter. I answered. She asked how it went. I said it went according to process. She paused. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I'd come by on Saturday and we could talk properly. She said okay in the small voice she used when she was uncertain and trying not to show it. I remembered that voice from when she was 9 years old and had broken something she wasn't supposed to touch. I missed her. That's the thing nobody tells you about these situations. The grief runs alongside everything else, patient and uninvited. Saturday arrived before Thursday was finished with me. On Friday morning, my son-in-law sent a text, polite surface, urgent underneath. He said he'd been thinking about the estate and that he had some ideas about how things could be structured that would benefit everyone. He used the word streamlined. He said he knew someone who specialized in this kind of situation and that the timing was important. That word, timing, people use it when they mean hurry. I forwarded to my attorney. Her response came back in 12 minutes. Good. Do nothing. I did nothing. That afternoon, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. A man who identified himself as a financial consultant said he understood I had a matter pending and that he could help me navigate it efficiently and protect my interests. He said protect twice. I asked who had referred him. He paused. He said he'd been referred by someone associated with the family. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I wrote down the number, the time, and the phrase associated with the family. My attorney drafted a brief notice that went to my son-in-law's email and to the estate's representative. It stated that all communications regarding the estate were to be directed through counsel. No commentary, no accusation, just instruction, clean and unarguable. His reply came back within the hour. Careful and slightly formal, a different tone than his texts. He said he was simply trying to help. He said he hoped this wouldn't create unnecessary distance. I didn't answer. Some sentences are bait. The trick is recognizing them before you bite. Saturday morning, I drove to my daughter's house. I brought coffee from the place she liked, and I parked in the driveway the way I always did. She met me at the door. Her eyes were tired, and she was wearing the old cardigan she wore when she wasn't performing anything, which meant she was scared. We sat at her kitchen table. Her husband was not home. She said he'd gone to play golf. We both understood something about that. I didn't lead with the legal details. I asked her how she was. She said fine and then corrected herself. She said she'd been worried. I asked her what she'd been told. She said her husband had told her the estate was complicated and that if they didn't act quickly, the opportunity would close. She said opportunity the way someone says a word they've been given rather than chosen. I set my coffee down. I told her about the letter. I told her about the clause. I told her about the clause and the consultant and the text about streamlining. I told her slowly and evenly, the way my father used to tell me hard things, not softened, not dramatized, just placed on the table like the object it was. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you were slow to handle these things, that you needed guidance." I didn't speak. She looked at her hands. She said, "I should have called you myself." I told her she was calling me now. That was enough. She asked what happened next. I said the estate would process according to the instructions left by her uncle. I said it would take several months and then nothing was going to disappear. I told her the money I'd given them for the house was not something I wanted returned. That was never about accounting. I told her I was her father and that was a fact that didn't require a third party to manage. Her eyes filled. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. I stayed for 2 hours. We talked about her job, about her garden, about a trip she wanted to take. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation that doesn't make anything dramatic, but holds things together. At the seams. When I left, she hugged me at the door longer than usual. Her husband came home as I was getting in my car. He saw me. I saw him see me. He lifted one hand in a wave that landed somewhere between greeting and apology. I gave him a brief nod and pulled out of the driveway. The following week moved at the pace of procedure, which is slower than urgency wants it to be and more reliable. The estate's representative confirmed the documentation. My attorney filed the appropriate paperwork. The financial consultant did not call again. My son-in-law sent one more text, breezy, short, asking about dinner plans, and when I didn't respond, he went quiet. Silence from people like that is not peace. It's recalculation. On a Wednesday evening, my phone rang, his number. I answered. He got to the point faster than I expected, which told me someone had advised him to. He said he understood the estate had a designated structure and that he respected that. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. He said the word family 3 times in 4 sentences. I let a beat pass. Then I said, "I'd like you to understand something clearly. This isn't about hard feelings. The estate will proceed the way my brother intended it to proceed. My daughter is my concern. The rest is paperwork." He said, "Of course." I said, "Good night." I ended the call and looked at the clock on the microwave. 8:41. I wrote it down out of habit. A week later, the estate's representative sent a formal update. Everything was on schedule. The designated instructions were being followed. A portion of the estate, as I came to understand it more fully, was structured with specific protections for long-term family members, conditions that couldn't be accelerated, redirected, or leveraged without triggering the supervised hold. My brother, who I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, had written those protections into the document himself. I sat with that for a while. I thought about the last real conversation we'd had before the silence grew its furniture. We'd argued about something that started as money and ended as something older and harder to name. I'd said things I couldn't unsay. He'd said things I'd carried longer than he probably knew. I thought I understood him. I thought I knew what he valued. I was wrong about the silence. It turned out he'd been watching from a longer distance than I gave him credit for. My daughter came to see me the following Sunday. She brought the old coffee cake recipe our mother used to make. The one with the brown sugar crumble that never came out right for anyone except the women in our family. And somehow it came out right for her. We ate at my kitchen table and she asked me about the estate timeline and I told her what I knew, which was less than she expected and more honest than she was used to. She asked if she owed me an apology. I told her no. I told her the only thing she owed me was the truth when she had it, and she'd given me that when it mattered. She said, "I think I was afraid of disappointing you." I said, "You never have." She looked out the window for a moment. Then she said her husband had been under pressure, that there were debts she hadn't known about, that she'd only found out 2 weeks before my brother died, and that the timing had felt like an answer to something they were trying to solve. I didn't speak right away. I turned my coffee cup twice in my hands. Then I said, "When someone is carrying a debt they haven't told you about, they're not protecting you, they're protecting themselves. That's worth knowing." She nodded. She'd already known it. Sometimes knowing and being able to say it out loud are two different things, and you need someone older to give the words permission. We talked for 3 hours. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years, and most of it wasn't about any of this. It was about her mother, my late wife, who she missed in a way that had quietly reorganized her whole life without anyone noticing. It was about what she wanted her life to look like at 40. It was about the garden, which she'd started the year my wife got sick and kept going as a kind of maintenance agreement with grief. When she left, she said she'd see me Thursday. I said I'd make dinner. The estate finalized in stages, the way legitimate things do. No ceremony, no revelation, just a sequence of documents confirming what was already written. My brother had been careful, more careful than I'd ever given him credit for. And I thought about that with a feeling I don't have a clean word for, somewhere between gratitude and the particular sadness of understanding someone too late. There was a property included, a small piece of land upstate, the kind of land that doesn't do anything except exist and remain. He'd held it for 30 years. I remembered him buying it when we were young men who still thought we had plenty of time to repair things. I kept it. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but some things deserve to be held rather than handled. My son-in-law and I didn't speak for 2 months, not coldly. There was no scene, no confrontation, just the natural withdrawal that happens when a maneuver doesn't succeed and everyone adjusts to the actual terrain. My daughter navigated it with more grace than she probably got credit for. She kept her separate relationship with me separate and didn't ask me to perform reconciliation. I didn't feel. Eventually, he came to dinner. He shook my hand at the door, held it a half-second longer than usual, and said he was sorry for any confusion earlier in the year. It wasn't a full reckoning. It was a man doing what men like him do when they want to move forward, offering the minimum version of an apology and hoping it covers everything. I accepted it, not because it was sufficient, because my daughter was standing in the kitchen doorway watching us, and she needed that moment more than I needed to be right. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that being right and being finished are two different things. Some people hand you an ending that looks like a loss, and it isn't one. Some people hand you a letter with a wax seal on a Tuesday morning, and it turns out your brother was trying, in the only way he had left, to give you something solid to stand on. I keep his letter in the manila folder in my desk drawer. Not as evidence, just as a reminder that the people we stop talking to don't stop knowing us. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, they leave you proof. My daughter called me the night I wrote all of this down. She asked what I was doing. I said I was trying to get the shape of the year into something I could look at. She said, "Does it have a shape?" I said, "Yes, it looks like patience." There was a pause. Then she laughed. The real one. The one she doesn't know she makes. And said, "Dad, that's the most you thing you've ever said." She wasn't wrong. If you're somewhere in the middle of something like this, someone using speed to replace honesty, someone using your name in a room you weren't invited to, I want to tell you what I learned. Not as advice, just as fact. Urgency is almost always someone else's emergency dressed up as yours. Process moves slower than pressure, and that is its function. You don't have to run toward the door they open. Sometimes the right move is to read the letter twice, make the call you've been putting off, and trust that paper holds its shape longer than noise does. If this found you at the right moment, I'd like to know. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. We share stories like this because sometimes a stranger's truth is the thing that makes your own make sense. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. These stories don't shout, they just stay. I've been sitting with this year long enough now that I can see its shape without flinching, and the shape of it isn't what I expected when my son-in-law first used the word entitled on the phone. It isn't a story about winning. It's a story about what happens when people reveal themselves under pressure and what you choose to do with what they show you. My son-in-law is not a bad man. I want to say that plainly because the easy version of this story makes him a villain, and I don't think that's accurate. He's a man who was carrying a debt he was ashamed of, who saw a door open, and who walked through it without stopping to check what was on the other side. People do that. The mistake wasn't the greed exactly. It was the assumption that speed and confidence could substitute for honesty, that if he moved fast enough, the paperwork would follow. It didn't. It never does. What I keep thinking about is my brother. 4 years of silence between us, and he still put my name in that document. He still wrote protections into the estate that only made sense if he'd been paying attention to my life from a distance. That's not luck. That's a man who understood that what we leave behind says something about what we actually valued, not just what we said we valued. He could have left me nothing. He chose to leave me something solid. I think about that whenever I'm tempted to believe that the people we lose track of have stopped caring. There's a thing I've noticed in my 60s that I didn't understand in my 40s. The people who rush you are almost always serving their own timeline, not yours. Urgency is a manipulation tool before it's anything else. And the antidote to urgency isn't stubbornness, it's process. You slow down, you read the document, you make the call you've been putting off, and you let the structure do what structure is designed to do. My brother built that structure. My attorney navigated it. All I had to do was not panic. My daughter is the part of this I hold most carefully. She was caught in the middle of something she didn't fully understand, and she trusted the wrong person's version of events for longer than she'd like to admit. But when I sat down with her at her kitchen table and told her the shape of things plainly, she heard it. She didn't defend what had been done. She looked at her hands and said she should have called me herself. That took more honesty than most people manage. I'm proud of her for it in a way I haven't told her yet, but I will. What I want to say to anyone listening is this. The choices you make when something valuable is suddenly at stake, that's where your actual character lives. Not in the easy moments. In the ones where you could justify moving fast, cutting corners, dressing up self-interest as practicality. My son-in-law made a set of choices in those weeks that he'll carry with him. Not because I'm holding them against him, but because actions leave a residue. He knows what he tried to do. So does my daughter. So do I. I didn't walk away from that year feeling triumphant. I walked away feeling clear, and at 63, clear is worth more than any of the rest of it.